the idea is for this column, it's something I write every couple of weeks, and it's all to do with stories in games.
Okay.
And so the questions I'm going to be asking, and where I sort of want the conversation to go, is just around stories. And I wanted to talk to you specifically because your games are, all the ones that I know about, the ones I'm really familiar with, they're always so personal. And you know, I know you probably get this all the time, but I've seen Indie Game the movie, and you come across in that film very well because you seem very sort of candid, very open about sort of where you get your inspirations from. And I thought that you were an interesting person to talk to about stories in games, because I don't know whether you necessarily think of yourself as a storyteller, but I actually think that you are. And that was really where I wanted to start, is to what extent do you consider yourself a storyteller?
I mean, I do like telling stories, but I don't think I think of myself as a storyteller, because I guess it's a non-traditional way of telling a story. Like even in games, I'm not a fan of telling traditional stories, or at least using traditional story structure in video games, because I feel like video games give you the ability to kind of tell a story in a more unique way, a more interactive way, and possibly a way that makes people think more, and maybe even opens them up creatively a bit to kind of fill in the gaps when you're not telling like a literal story. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoy telling stories, but I'm not necessarily in a traditional sense.
No, okay. So I'm thinking of Binding of Isaac now specifically. Obviously, that seems as if you're really trying to present a message to the player. But
yeah, it's when I think about it though, it's less, for me at least, it's less of a message and more of a conversation. And I think maybe that's where I approach storytelling, less of me telling somebody how it is, but more of me asking the question is this how it is? And what do you think? I think there's something more to that. I think when you kind of approach a story with kind of an open mind, like when I go in to tell a story, I don't necessarily know exactly what I'm going to say all the time, because I'm usually basing it off of personal experiences in some respect, and the stuff that I'm usually most interested in is the stuff that I don't completely understand, and I want to explore it, and that's why I find it interesting. Like I'm not the kind of person that likes retelling the same stories, and I want answers, and I want to know why. I'm interested in knowing why I have certain obsessions with things, and why there are, reoccurring themes in my work, and I want to explore them more so I can figure out, why they're there. And I kind of go in with an open mind and don't have a lot planned out, but I just have these, some of them are ideas, some of them are feelings, some of them are based on other stories that I've heard. They're all things that I find interesting, and I kind of push them all together because I feel like they belong in this package, but I don't necessarily know why. And I think that's kind of important, at least for me, when I'm going into something, because not only does it keep me interested in what I'm doing, because I get to explore it myself, but I think it also, when I approach it that way, I think other people see it more open-ended, and they want to. I think it inspires people creatively when you kind of approach it that way, where you're not telling somebody something, you're allowing them in, and you're asking a question, and I think it gets people's minds going, and I think that's what games do either way. Like when you approach a video game and you're playing it, I think you mostly kind of go in feeling with the idea that you're trying to solve a puzzle. That's usually how games work. You're trying to solve things, and I think if you approach what's perceived as the story in a similar manner, I think it kind of like gets that going in their heads. Like they start trying to fill in all the pieces of the puzzle, and they just start putting things together, and it kind of gets their mind going, but also gets the creative side of their mind going. And I felt this way with like Zelda and stuff like that when games didn't have a really set in stone story. Like there was barely any dialogue at all in Zelda. I don't think I even read the intro when I was little, and I jumped in and played it. Like it just felt a certain way to me. It felt like exploring. It felt like it reminded me of exploring when I was little, and I really liked it. It seemed so mysterious, and you got to like come to your own conclusions of why things were the way they were, and there was something magical about that, and it was kind of like leaving it open for the player to kind of take and go with it. And I'm not a fan of over explaining things. I hate it when there's backstories.
Right.
I don't ever want I want that mystery to be there because I feel like it's so important to have that mystery, that magic there. Like so it can be anybody's. Like anybody can take that mystery and make it their own and apply their own life experience or feelings or thoughts or whatever into it. And it doesn't necessarily make you wrong if what your interpretation is different than somebody else's. And that's kind of how I approach story stuff. Like I have an idea of what I want, but I don't want it to be a definitive thing. Like I don't want there to be an exact answer, and I don't exactly know what I'm doing when I'm doing it. I'm just kind of exploring interesting things that feel like they should belong together, and I trust in myself enough to know that I'm heading down the right path, and that I will come to some conclusion myself. But it's more of like an adventure when I kind of just jump in.
Okay, I mean I think that's really interesting because it sounds as if when I think of films, TV shows, I think of that really rigid structure.
Yeah,
and it's as if you're saying actually from a story point of view, games are almost better if you completely forget that. And actually a lot of the sort of Uncharted style storytelling in games is actually taking influences from somewhere that games don't need to be taking influences from.
And I'm not even necessarily saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying one of them's more interesting to me.
Right.
More and I believe more appropriate for what I want to do. Everybody, if you want to tell a story and it's a really cool story, and you want to tell it through a game, and there are ways to use gameplay to, make that story better. Actually, like Dear Esther is kind of like that, but it is kind of like how I'm saying as well. Like where there isn't, there is a kind of definitive answer to the story, but really the way the story is told and experienced is pretty unique in the way that it's left up to the player's interpretation to figure it out as they go. Like, since everything's kind of the dialogue is basically like poems, and you're attaching the poems to things that you experience or read on the walls or see or the mood, and they're all kind of tying together with the music. Like you're drawing your own conclusions about what's happening and why. I think that's really cool and really special too. But there are a lot of different ways. Honestly, I think we're really we're in the really early stages of learning how to speak through video games.
Right.
It's really, really, really primitive right now, and we're just kind of learning how to walk, I guess. And I think it'll get more, it'll get crazier and more innovative and different overall and just better as we go. But a lot of people still default back to the whole traditional storytelling in games. You use another medium, and you're a writer or you're a filmmaker, and you can easily use those, qualities and writing styles, and they will come through in a video game pretty easily. But you can go a step further and actually use gameplay in either a complementary manner to traditional storytelling, or in a new, completely abstract manner, which leans more on gameplay and experience. But it's still in fetal stage at this point. It's still everybody's still experimenting.
Yeah, like when films look like plays and all that sort of stuff in the early days of film.
Yeah, we're still we jumped into I think, well, I don't know the history of films as much as games, but I believe it's pretty similar. Where a lot of people when movies started said that they weren't art because they wouldn't have the intimacy of a play or whatever. And wasn't going to be the same. And I think the same goes for any kind of new art form, and video games are a new art form, and sadly, video games got swept up by business really, really, really early on. A little too hardcore, and I think that's why a lot of people have a hard time calling video games art and thinking of video games as having something to offer that goes beyond traditional mediums that they know of. But business tends to ruin a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and you can certainly see that it's starting to smooth off all the edges, and everything's looking very similar at the moment. But I think that the download, I don't mean to say the download, independent scene, digital downloads, smaller games, if I can say that, at lower prices, is encouraging a bit more experimentation. Do you think that's where the really interesting story type gameplay is coming from? You mentioned Dan Pinchbeck and Dear Esther, and I've spoken to him, and he has very similar views on this whole thing to you. This idea that if you create a world and you make the world bigger than the player can actually explore, they feel as if it has this mystery beyond its edges. They start filling in the gaps of the story. Yeah. And I wouldn't say as much as it has to be small games or anything else like that. I think it's more along the lines of small teams. The independent scene has a lot of advantages over the mainstream when it comes to not having to worry about money. And like you said, everything looks the same right now, and that's completely because of economy issues. Like, the risk is really high right now. If you're investing, if you're a mainstream companies business-wise feel like they need to invest a great deal of money in everything that they work on in order for it to succeed, which obviously isn't necessarily true because you've got stuff like Minecraft and Castle Crashers and everything that make shitloads of money, and they didn't invest that much money in it. But the need to invest so much money in something puts the risk so high. And when the economy is this bad, you run the risk of losing your company by failing with one game. So you have to play it as safe as you possibly can, and playing it safe means just copying what works. And independents don't have to worry about copying what works. They can do whatever they want, and they have the ability to experiment. So that's why I think you're finding a lot of these kind of riskier games coming out there, because the investment isn't at all as high. And the beauty of it is usually independent developers that don't have high risk and high budget usually are just one or two people. And when you've got one or two people, you've got a very, very tight and focused vision, which is also something that's quite absent from the mainstream. It's completely impossible to do. Like, you can have some designer that's kind of heading everything, but the reality of it, like, people always ask, like, well, now you've got money, are you going to hire more people so you can make bigger games? And it's like, I have no interest in that, because I feel like it just wouldn't be the same if somebody else did the art. I feel like it wouldn't be the same if somebody else was doing my jobs. You know what I mean? Like, I want to do them myself because there's no way for me to explain, especially the way I write. Like, there's no way for me to explain the importance of certain things in The Binding of Isaac, the way they look, the way they feel, because I'm not always 100% sure of exactly why they are the way they are. Like, that's why I need to do it. That's why I need to be hands-on with everything. And I think that's why it's kind of important for independents, like, to have the ability to do that. Like, to have, like, one or two people. You just need two sides of the brain. You usually need, you need the artistic side, traditional artistic side, and then you need the technical side, and those are the two sides that can make the game. And it's usually all you need. I mean, music is also good too, but you don't necessarily need somebody right there with the music at all times. But I think that's the way to kind of go when you want to do something that has a really pure vision and is kind of odd and experimental. All right. So when you're working with a programmer or the technical side of the brain, do you feel any responsibility to sort of put their personality into it, because they seem sort of locked away on the coding? How much influence they have on the vision? It's definitely different for each person. I've worked with a lot of different programmers, and honestly, part of why I enjoy making games has a lot to do with the social interaction of making a game with somebody, because in a lot of ways it feels like
playing a cooperative game with somebody. That's what game design feels like to me when I'm working with somebody else. Like, I need to cooperate with this person. I need to get along and understand this person. I need to know their strengths and their weaknesses, and I need to design around those. And it's different with each person that I work with. Certain programmers that I work with don't want to have anything to do with design, and they want to just do the technical side, and are fine with just kind of like me giving them the gist of what needs to be done and them doing it. But other people like Tommy, where it's more of like a marriage of kind of ideas. Like me and Tommy grew up in this. We're about the same age. We went through the same things, and we have very similar outlooks on things. And it's when I work with Tommy, it's more of like a back and forth. Like he of course is the technical side, but he's also the technical side of design, where I can kind of really trust him with like controls, with how things will technically work, the feel of the game overall. I trust him because we have a similar frame of reference, I guess. Like when I say, oh, it would be awesome if it felt more like Mario. Like, there's no more needs to be said. He understands because we've both been through that, and he's really good with that technical design side. But that's not to say in the past that I haven't, run into major problems when it comes to this sort of stuff too, because I can be a design Nazi. I have a hard time like sharing. Like I said, like it's sometimes it's very hard to explain. Like even when I worked on Ether with Tyler, I of course told him as much as I possibly could tell him about what I wanted to do with the game, but a lot of aspects of the game weren't really like the reasons behind things. Like I didn't really share all those things, and I kind of kept him in the dark about stuff. Mostly because I felt like I couldn't really explain it either way, and I don't know. But it's different with everybody that I work with. Like, and in the past I have run into problems where they wanted to do something, design wise, and I simply couldn't because I have a very hard time letting go of control over certain aspects of design. And if unless I'm in control, I'm not going to be that invested in it. And if I'm not invested, the game's probably not going to be that good.
Gotcha. I mean, it's probably to your benefit. Going back to Dear Esther, Dan Pinchbeck, the guy who developed it, is adamant that every aspect of the game, music, controls, narrative elements, gameplay, has to be perfectly in sync, level design, for it to sort of communicate what he wants to the player. Are you sort of that much of a design Nazi that you have to sort of make sure everything is running completely together? Or
I'm probably a bit more loose than he is. Right. I tend to be the kind of person that like I really want to make a lot of projects. Like I have a lot to say, and I have a lot that I think about, and I've made a lot of games, and I've learned to let go of a lot of the more anal control issues when it comes to like, not everything is going to be perfect, and I know that. I've accepted that that's not going to be perfect, and I don't necessarily believe that things do need to be perfect, but I try my best to make things work together as good as possible. But like something like I'm really proud of my work on Ether, but that game was I worked on it for 14 days. That was it. It was a quick project and it was done. And it's not to say it's perfect at all, but there's sometimes some beauty in that. Like there's beauty in like just going off that pure like not overthought emotion and energy and just going in and just riding the wave through and then just cutting it off when it ends. And you get this kind of raw honesty, I guess you could say. That isn't to say I don't appreciate games that are overthought and a lot of time goes into, but I'm not that kind of person. Like, I sometimes value just rough, like the really rough, raw, early, honest stuff that just kind of pours out. over the like really meticulous, really thought out and meticulously planned design aspects. But I do enjoy those things. Of course, I'm just not that kind of person. I tend to get bored easily, and I tend to lose inspiration easily, and I've come up with tons of different strategies on how to get around that. And one of those strategies is quite literally like just writing it as far as it'll go, and then when it's run out, just cutting it off. And I can't, like, I don't. That's not to say I don't think a lot about things and obsess about design and story aspects, but I'm willing to be okay with things not being perfect, because I kind of like that things aren't perfect. There's something to that.
There's a lot to be said for things not being perfect and just sort of going with your first instinct. Do you ever worry that by doing that maybe you'll go into an area which people might find a bit tricky to relate to, or
for sure, and I've done it. I've gone down that road many times. Like, but again, it's like the more games I do, the like wider my vocabulary becomes in terms of speaking through my work. And I've gotten better at it over the years, but definitely like my early work, I've fallen into pockets of design and story. Like, you could say, like, Coil was a bit alienating, like, to people, and not many people got it. And I was talking about something maybe too specific or too vague or too something, I don't know what. And then of course, like, a game like Cunt, which I come out like with an idea in my head. Again, this is another game that I made in only like 2 weeks, and I come out just, I wanted to just show my ability to do whatever I wanted, and not that I just simply didn't care, and I wanted to just do whatever and do something risky and odd, and kind of commit career suicide in a way. And then of course a lot of people jumped on it and read into things that weren't really there necessarily, and that was, of course, I guess you can consider a mistake of not really thinking and just going with it. But I don't regret it at all. I mean, it's still one of my better games, and one that I'm definitely still very proud of, simply just for doing it, because I value like improvisation, I guess you could say, and instinct and just raw emotion, and more than others, I guess, do.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, and also by your standards, that would definitely been a success, because if people are looking into it and seeing beyond what you may have sort of put in there in a literal way, then people are having that conversation with the game.
Yeah, and and maybe there, who knows? Like, in a lot of ways, it made me feel like made me think maybe there was more going on than I realized when I was making it. You never know, but not enough for me to actually acknowledge it and talk about it, I guess.
No, well, again, Indie Game the movie, the way that film was shot when they were talking about Bandage Girl and Meat Boy, they drew a parallel there between yourself and your wife that I don't know whether necessarily you'd have thought of, but certainly they were looking at it and they saw it, whether it was there deliberately or not.
Yeah, it definitely was. Like, I don't... Of course, I like weird stuff, I like strange stuff. I like stuff that's different. I tend to view things that most people view as ugly. I tend to just view them as uniquely beautiful. Like, there's something really... When something's different, I just feel like it's perfect in its own way. Like, it has more value than something that's just normal. And I tend to focus on that with everything that I do. And a lot of people just see weird things in my games and just assume that I'm being weird for weird's sake. But that, I don't think I've ever really done that. There's usually always a very thought out, reality. Yeah, the weird thing about that part in the movie was I actually felt like I wasn't. So they caught me at a moment where I hadn't slept in a long time, and I don't really completely remember talking about it. But I think in a way I thought I was still being cryptic, I didn't think that they would connect the dots. And like that part of the movie just hit me so, and it just like I just felt like I got punched in the stomach, and I felt like I was reading, poetry, personal poetry to my wife. I felt like it was being read aloud in class,
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh my god, I'd never felt so exposed and naked before. But that's one of the many reasons why I don't like talking like in depth about my personal meanings and reasons behind things, because they're not necessarily going to translate for everybody else.
No.
So I feel like if a majority of people aren't going to appreciate or get it, then there's no point in me like connecting the dots for everybody else. But of course, like there's a reason behind everything, even if it's just some primitive, because it's fun or funny. But there's I think about everything that I do, and there's a reason for everything.
Of course. How are you for time, by the way? I just realised we're at 25 minutes. I don't want to take up too much.
No, I'm pretty open today, so don't worry.
Okay, good. So I wanted to try and find out what games you might have played recently, story-wise, that you've really liked. Doesn't matter if they're big console, small games, whether I'd have heard of them or whether I wouldn't. Just anything that's really grabbed your eye and thought, oh, that's communicating a message to me or telling me a story that I'm interested in.
The most recent would be Dear Esther, of course.
Yeah.
I really appreciated the story, and it was a more literal story, but it was still unique. It's called like Dysphoria, and it was by Anna Anthropy, and it was kind of an interactive story about her experience with taking. Is there any way you can close the window?
Yeah.
One sec. There's somebody mowing outside.
Okay.
Because she's making the transition from male to female, and kind of her experience with that and the reasons why, and it was kind of a question I think that she was asked a lot. Everybody wants to know why she wants to be a girl, and she got to answer that question in a really appropriate way through a game, because that's what she does, and I thought that was really special and unique, and I like all that sort of stuff. I'm trying to think of other story-wise stuff. I don't think all video games need some awesome story or deeper meaning or tell a story in some unique way in order to be good. Of course, I really enjoyed the story in Braid. Of course, I had a different story than most did because I worked on Braid, and the ending was different when I originally had played it, and in my opinion, way more impactful and unique, but maybe not something he felt comfortable with putting out in such a literal way.
Right.
But I still appreciated how he handled that story, and it was interesting to see how it changed over development and how he kind of, what's the word, obfuscated things a bit.
Right.
He definitely clouded it up. So the original ending wasn't as literal, because I've heard him say that it took different meaning as he developed, so he kind of changed it a bit. But I still see the ending, like I still see the original ending, and what I read, what I saw as the original ending is still there in gameplay, and that was one of the things I thought made Braid really, really special, was that you could bypass. In a lot of ways, I personally believe that the writing in that game just clouded up the story and the meaning, because I feel like the gameplay told a very, very specific and literal story, which was really awesome. And if you just play it without the extras, I think you can draw a more clear conclusion. But that's not to say that maybe he doesn't have a clear conclusion anymore, and I'm just simply seeing things how they used to be. But there was something really special about it that I really liked about the overall themes bleeding together, and the idea that you're like kind of this guy who wants to take back something, who wants to fix things but can't, and is constantly going back and trying to fix things. Like, he's always trying to fix his mistakes. Like, that's what the game's about. Like, that's what you're doing. You have the ability to fix your mistakes, but in the end, maybe you simply can't fix that one mistake. You know, the big one, and you're constantly trying to, like, go back and go back and go back, but you just can't do it because that's it. I think there was something really cool about that, and really powerful. And not many games can bleed gameplay into story that well, and I think that was one of the things that made Braid so special. I mean, I thought the writing in World of Goo was really great too. I mean, because it was essentially about their experience with working in the mainstream. Not many people even talk about that, like the whole idea of the fact that the guys who made it both worked for EA, and it was essentially, the game was about that.
Right.
And not a lot of people read into that either. I think with a lot of games, when you kind of go in one or two people and you just kind of open yourself up and you're really honest with what you're doing, I think it's kind of impossible to not have this really personal underlying theme happening in your work, that even if you don't intend there to be a story, even if you don't intend there to be any kind of message or anything, I think it's kind of impossible for you to avoid the fact that you're still going to be inside of it. Like, the people who made it are still going to be there. Their hang-ups, their obsessions, you know, their views on the world, and how they are and how they're treated and how they're viewed, they're all going to just bleed into everything that they do. It's impossible for an artist to stop that. Even to the point of, like, I think a lot of illustrators tend to draw themselves in their work. You'd be surprised how many people, like even in the independent scene, look very similar to the characters that they draw. And there's something to that too. And that's what I think I appreciate the most when it comes to, you know, independent artists and stuff like that. They really kind of throw themselves into their work, maybe even unintentionally. And that's the kind of, you know, in quotes, that's the kind of story that I appreciate. You know, I appreciate the personal, honest story that maybe's not even intended. Like, you know, like Cactus's work, it'd be hard to pick and choose a game of his and then pinpoint the person with the game. But if you take a step back and you look at his body of work, you can see a pretty clear picture of who this person is. You know, their hang-ups, their obsessions, their thoughts and feelings about a varying degree of things. And I think that's really interesting. And it's kind of what I appreciate more than any kind of traditional storytelling.
I mean, I completely agree that sort of insight into the artist is fascinating, and I think that you know, the same can certainly be said for your body of work, or the bits that I'm familiar with. I always say, whenever I talk about it, I always say you can spot one of your games, because there's a feeling to them which I think is quite consistent. Might just be.
Well, that's pretty cool, because I definitely, in the past, that was actually not ever said. I got the opposite. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, I didn't realize you did that too.
I mean, maybe. I mean, I have to be completely honest. I've played a few of your games, but not all. But certainly the ones that I've played, you know, you wouldn't have to tell me they were your game, and I'd have thought, well, that, you know, that seems to be. But yeah, I certainly think so. So, apart from, I suppose my last area that I wanted to dig into really was what's inspiring you at the moment. What sort of things are grabbing your interest? If that's something that you don't mind talking about.
Oh yeah, totally. The things that are interesting to me right now a lot are random generation, and not necessarily just because of, you know, it's fun to do randomly generated games, but that there's something to that. It's going to be a vague and kind of odd comparison, but I used to work as an animal control officer, and I always said that I really enjoyed the job because every time it wasn't boring, like it wasn't an office job. I didn't go to work knowing exactly what I was going to be doing. and I was able to get lost in the work because I was improvising. Like every day it was different. Every day I'd get a different call, or it could be a good day, it could be a bad day, and I had no idea what day it was going to be, and it was always interesting, and it always made me want to go back to work. Even though the job wasn't that fun, it was an adventure. And I think there's something to random generation in games, and it kind of being similar in a way, where there's something to that kind of re-rolling, not knowing what's going to happen, and re-rolling the day, and the day being a new experience, and that's kind of how important that is in life, to just enjoy life. It's the magic of improvisation and not knowing it, and just kind of going in and playing it out, how the day's kind of laid out for you. And I think that's kind of why I got on this kick of roguelike formulas and stuff like that with Isaac, and I'll definitely be using similar formulas in the next 2 games that I work on, because I'm almost kind of obsessed with the idea of, like, there's something to that goes beyond games that I think is really special and really interesting. And I honestly almost feel like at this point that random generation is the future of video games. Like I feel like that's just the natural progression. Like if you could kind of put that into most games, it would make things kind of infinitely replayable and just better overall, and just more, I don't know. But it depends on the design, of course, and it's probably a tangent that I probably will have a different opinion on as the years roll by. But right now it feels really special, and that's kind of what I'm obsessed with, and I'm trying to figure out ways to incorporate that into the games that I'm working on now, even if it's to a small degree. And right now I'm working on Super Meat Boy the game, which is kind of I need to find a good way to talk about it, because when I say that it's a remake of Super Meat Boy, I'm not really telling the truth, because it's not. It's really a whole new game. Like, it's a whole new game with the same kind of characters, but it's a retelling. Like, it's going to have like the similar story and feel, but I definitely would like to like kind of write a bit more abstractly about the experience. Like, in a way, it's kind of like retrospective, like a retrospective look at my experience and Tommy's experience with developing and releasing Super Meat Boy. And I don't know how much that's going to come through in the game, but that's kind of at the space that I'm at right now, where I think both of us have a really like a love-hate relationship with Super Meat Boy.
Right. And
the love part, I think, is something that we want back. And I think we're both hoping that by making a new game, a new Super Meat Boy game, that's really nothing like the original Super Meat Boy, that maybe we'll be able to fall in love with it again and kind of get rid of all the bad stuff that came along with it, the bad business side of things.
Right.
And it's like I still have this, like I have feelings for this character and this story that I don't necessarily want it to go away, and but I also don't want to rehash it, And there's just something about the experience, like the experience with Microsoft, the experience with Steam, the experience with being filmed, the movie releasing, and all the stuff that's been happening. And I have no idea how the hell it's going to come through in the game, but it's just kind of something that feels inspiring in a way, and I'd like to somehow talk about, but don't know exactly how I'm going to do that yet. But I'm positive that it's all going to bleed into the game, and it's kind of what I'm writing on right now. And I'm also putting together the Basement Collection, which is in a lot of ways quite similar to that as well, where the past 2 years of my life has become this kind of like me looking back in time and trying to figure out how the hell I got here, like what led me here, like to the point of just kind of I'm just going back in time. Like I'm constantly going back and like searching around for meaning and figuring out why things turned out the way they did, and in a lot of ways going through my old games and putting them in this pack and kind of like revisiting them. I'm like getting to, I guess, like re-experience the process and maybe appreciate it a bit more. And I'm hoping that maybe by releasing it, other people will appreciate it as well. Like I hate the one thing I hate about the movie is the illusion that it cast that I just fucking appeared and I made a video game that sold 1 million copies with Tommy.
Yeah.
Like, and I know for a great majority of people who have any fucking clue who I am think that. Like, they have no idea the steps that it took to get here, and I kind of hate that illusion, because it's definitely something that that television and movies kind of really push in people's faces, like the idea of like you just magically win the lottery and that's it. Like, there's no work involved. You just become successful, and they tend to not focus on, well, because no one does. Like, no one's gonna put a fucking camera on me for 10 years when I'm not doing anything that anybody cares about. Like, I've been working independently since I was like 16 years old. I started out making comics, then I started out making websites, then I started out making animated Flash stuff, then I moved on to Flash games, then I moved on to indie games, and then I did that for 10 years. And I hope that kind of releasing this pack not only will give fans something to kind of revisit and go through and kind of, like you said, maybe like get more perspective on my body of work and what I'm about, but also kind of see that it takes a lot of time and effort in order to kind of achieve something like that. Like, I went through many, many years of just working my ass off and having a really fun time doing it, and then eventually had the opportunities kind of arise, and then take those opportunities and then just try my hardest to prove my worth to the world, really. Like, I just don't want to. I don't want to be another one of those people that just, in a way, discourages people because people are like, well, he just got lucky, and that's that. Like, and I know that there's a lot of that kind of going around, but I think the majority of it is kind of like that illusion, and that's kind of why I'm doing the Basement Collection. And it's also for me, it's also a celebration of kind of like my work, and I do enjoy what I've done. I have a hard time sometimes playing my stuff, like I think any artist does. Like, sometimes it's hard to look at stuff, and sometimes you're like, oh my god, like it seems so amateurish and contrived or just not that good. But there's a bit of honesty as well, of just like letting go of that and just saying, well, this is where I was at the time, and take it for what it is. I'm sure there's stuff that you can appreciate in here and maybe enjoy, and if not, you don't have to play it. But it's there, and that's basically it. Like, I'm also putting together like a comic compilation, which is something that I always told myself when I was really young, that once I get some money, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put all my comics into a book, because that was kind of a dream of mine when I was young, and I kind of gave up on that dream many years ago, and I decided I would just do it. Like, I'm not really going to make any money off of it, but it was something that I at least just wanted to hold in my hands, like the whole collection of my Cry for Help comics that I did in high school, because I know that my past self would really appreciate it. So in a way, it's kind of a gift to him. But again, it was a trip down memory lane, and it was fun to do. And that's just kind of where I am right now. Like, I've been forced into this search for meaning, I guess.
I mean, it's really interesting you say that. It makes me wonder, when you were making Super Meat Boy, that's a game where you work and work and work and take these small steps forward until you finally have the achievement at the end of a level. And was there any of your 10 years of small steps forward towards success in the design of Super Meat Boy? Or am I overreading it?
You could say in a way yes, because the whole idea behind that was to approach the design of a platformer in a more realistic way, and like make it more along the lines of like sometimes you have to just keep going and eventually do it, and like it's a lot of perspective stuff. Like I do have an obsession with perspective and changing your perspective on things, like, and just keeping yourself like your eye on the goal. Like and with Super Meat Boy, there was always the idea of keeping the goal on the screen so you don't get discouraged, because it's so easy to lose sight of something and then get discouraged. Like if you put Band-Aid Girl, we experimented with this too, just putting her a little off screen and you couldn't see her in levels like that. It was so much more discouraging because you felt like you had to go so far to get her. And like with Meat Boy, there was a lot of reality kind of coming into it and realizing like how to avoid frustration and discouragement in life in general and how to avoid it in the game. Sadly, life isn't necessarily like that, but it's a perspective thing. It's how you view things. Like if you view something that you have as a goal that is just so far away, you're going to be so discouraged by it. But if you view it as like a baby step process where like you're enjoying it and you're just doing a little bit every day to get to your goal, then you're going to get there eventually. It's going to happen. You put a little in every day, you get better, you get further, and everything else. It wasn't a literal thing, of course. It wasn't something like I'm going to put some message in a game. But it was more like, art imitating life in a way. What was that?
Sorry, I was putting words in your mouth. I said it was a reflection of where you were when you were making it.
I wouldn't say literally. It was maybe in some respects, but it was more of me just kind of looking critically at video games in the same way I do at life. I think all designers do this. Like it's the best things that I've added in games all come from just experiences and realities and just thinking logically about things but yeah, no, I can't say that I literally thought these things out when designing it, but I was more or less trying to use things that I experienced in life and trying to figure out how to avoid discouragement in a game and how to make reward more substantial. Because in reality, when you feel good about something, when you work really hard to achieve it, if it's handed to you, you don't feel good about it. Like when you're the few awards that I've won, I've won quite a few. What is it like? What do they give you when you just go? You just show up for the award. Like, but what is it? What's the name for it? Like
A parting gift.
No, it's like you just get it for participating, kind of.
Yeah, I can't think of it. Sorry.
Like I don't remember the name, but
consolation prize.
Yeah, a consolation prize. So it's basically like that. Like you don't hold on to those. I've got a lot of those in my day. Like, oh, thanks, I got the award that everybody who got into this thing got. Like, this isn't really much of an achievement. If you kind of in a lot of games do that, like everybody's beating this game. Here you go. Here's an achievement. You beat level 1. It's just like they feel just so meaningless because you know realistically that you didn't do much to get it.
Mm.
And with Meat Boy, it's asking more. Like it's asking you to go further than what you're used to in games and continue to push yourself. And a lot of the really hard stuff is completely optional. It's just there for the extra challenge if you want to go there. Like you don't have to play the Dark World at all, but it's there. And if you do it and you complete it, you're going to feel really good about it. And in a lot of ways, like the replays are a reminder of the experience, so you realize how much effort it took to get there. And all that stuff is important. Like it's just all that real reward is important. It really makes you feel good when you do something hard. That's very important. Everybody feels good when they do something hard, and everybody knows when they're being coddled and talked down to by something. Like it's just we're not little children. You know, we can't all be lied to by the games that we play and the things that we do. And I think you appreciate those things more too. Like, good example is my sister always had like cars that just fell out of the sky for her. Like I never had like a good car. I had like a broken down truck that I drove for forever, and my sister would just my mom would just give her a car, and well, eventually she'd trade that car in for a new car and then another car, and she never had to really work for these cars. And these cars were just demolished by the time she was done with them. She just did not take care of them. She didn't really care at all about the car. But she would if she worked for it. And I think that like there's something to that too. Like you just have respect for something more when you work for it, and it's really important. And that's why my games are hard. That's why they're more challenging, because I feel like there's just so much more value in accomplishing something, and I think it feels much better when you finally do it than something that everybody does, and that's easy to do. And I just don't want to treat the people who play my games like little babies who need to be coddled and lied to and manipulated into thinking that they did something that was hard when it wasn't.
Sure. Thank you very much. I've got no more questions. You've been terrific. You've just, really given me some really detailed answers. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks for asking good questions. I honestly have never had anybody ask story-related questions or any of these kind of questions, so it was a very welcome interview. So thank you.